Andy Burnham's first speech since being re-elected says the Hillsborough law passed by MPs tonight should end a cover-up culture and be a rewiring of the state. Do Hillsborough survivors agree? And the next Prime Minister says MPs need to listen to nuclear test veterans, calling for a special tribunal into their experiences. After decades, will they finally get the answers they've been seeking? Good evening. We are Newsnight, live from Studio 54D in the Blue Tower at Broadcasting House for top takes and interviews each weeknight on a warm summer's evening here in London. Hello. We can never forget that for 20 years an entire English city was crying injustice correctly. And yet this place ignored them for all of that time. We cannot forget that. That's Andy Burnham's first speech in the House of Commons since being re-elected. It was about the long-delayed, historic Hillsborough law, which was passed by MPs tonight. It imposes a duty on public authorities and officials to tell the truth and proactively cooperate with investigations. Police covered up their own mistakes and wrongly blamed fans for causing the deaths of their friends at the 1989 FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Here's what the UK's next Prime Minister said in Parliament.
We have had a situation in this country where people suffer the trauma of the initial bereavement, the incident that took their loved ones away. Then they are re-traumatised by the behaviour of the state. We can't take that hurt away tonight, but we can put decency back at the heart of the British state, and that is what this bill does. And I finish again by praising the Prime Minister for making it happen, and this truly is his legacy. Thank you very much.
Nick Watt watched Andy Burnham's speech. Nick, give us a sense of the emotion in the moment.
Well, Paddy, it was a very emotionally charged atmosphere because the outgoing Prime Minister and the incoming Prime Minister have both campaigned on this issue for a long time, and it is very dear to their hearts. And, of course, there were families of the victims who were in the public gallery. But the immediate challenge for Andy Burnham is that he came immediately after Kieran Mullen, who had been the main Conservative spokesperson from the front bench. Now, Kieran Mullen performed his constitutional duty, which is to hold the government to account, and he questioned the speed with which the bill has been introduced and questioned the substance of elements of the bill. But the relative silence on the Conservative benches gave the impression that a number of Conservative MPs that felt that perhaps Kieran Mullen hadn't met the emotional moment, and there was uproar on the Labour benches at the way that he criticised the Prime Minister. So that was the moment when Andy Burnham spoke. And Andy Burnham initially sort of didn't meet that moment. He sort of clearly had his pre-prepared remarks, because the obvious thing would have been to criticise the Conservative, but that's not the new Andy Burnham approach. And I was talking to one ally of Andy Burnham who thought that it was a difficult start. He looked nervous with his papers. But Labour MPs are saying by the end of the speech that we saw there, Andy Burnham had absolutely found his stride with that incredible, powerful account of the impact of Liverpool. And in his speech, he did pay tribute to a very prominent Liverpool MP, Ian Byrne, and Ian Byrne then did have a chance to make his speech.
Families of the 97, those who are still with us, and those we have sadly lost along the way, you will never ever be forgotten. You carry the burden that should never have been yours. You fought with dignity when others showed none. You taught this country that ordinary people can overcome the most extraordinary abuse of power. To every survivor, I hope today brings some measure of peace. Not because it can erase the past, nothing ever will, but because your suffering has brought about lasting change for generations to come. Madam Deputy Speaker, for decades I asked myself why I survived. Today I think I understand. Not because I've done anything extraordinary, but because I was given the privilege of standing here and carrying the voices of people who could no longer speak for themselves. If in some small way I've honoured the memory of the 97, if I've been worthy of the trust the families and survivors have placed in me, if this Parliament finally ensures that no grieving family will ever have to come to fight the state simply to uncover the truth, then every setback, every disappointment, every sleepless night will have been worth it.
Joining us now is Ian Byrne, the Labour MP for Liverpool West Derby and a survivor of the Hillsborough disaster. Hello.
Hi, Paddy.
Thanks for coming. A long-standing campaigner for the new law. And we're also joined by Professor John Ashton, who was also at the match with two of his sons and his nephew. He led the assessment of casualties behind the Leppings Lane end because no one else was taking charge. Professor John, welcome to you.
Good evening.
Let me start with you, Ian. What day was this in your life?
Oh, yeah, it was huge. It was a huge day. We fought so long for the moment. It's been such a journey really to get to where we got to today. So, yeah, I think today was emotional on so many levels. You know, seeing the families there. My dad was there; he was a survivor. I had my friend there who was actually on your footage getting pulled out of the Leppings Lane end. So yeah, it's been a huge part of my life. So today felt relief, really, Paddy. Just relief.
But I heard you say you'd questioned why you'd survived.
Yeah, because, you know, lots of my friends text me who were at the match and he said, that question's asked all the time. You know, you do wonder, you know, what was the purpose, why, you know, people went to football match and never come home and some of us did. And you did question it. It is a question that arises lots of times. You know, as I said in the speech, that's exactly how it is. You know, during the middle of the night, you did question it, and I think today sort of, in my mind, you know, validated, you know, why you did, because then I had the opportunity to push this law through, to lead on it, but also to express the views of people who were at Hillsborough. So, yeah, it meant an awful lot to me today.
John, to you, I wonder how Hillsborough has shaped your life.
Well, it changed my life. It had a dramatic impact on the way I took my responsibilities as a Director of Public Health for 40 years, and the priority I gave to disaster preparedness and emergency planning and all of that. And we had to face a lot of those kind of things in the northwest of England over those years, you know, with IRA bombs and the mass shooting in Cumbria and all sorts of things that went wrong. And I was determined that if we had those kind of incidents, I wasn't to, you know what was coming down the track, that we would be able to acquit ourselves properly, and we did. I mean, it's a bittersweet moment today. It's 37 years, and the dignity of people like Margaret Aspinall representing the families, and you know, I think one has to acknowledge, I mean, Ian himself, but particularly Andy Burnham, you know, who I don't think, if he hadn't shown the emotional literacy that day at Anfield on the occasion of the commemorative service, I don't think we'd be here today with this. I mean, I think, you know, I'm hoping that this is going to really mark a change in the way this country goes forward, because we had these people at senior positions who lied, highly paid people with knighthoods and all the rest of it, and who lied about ordinary people who've had to live with this all this time. So you asked the question, how did it affect me? It affected me and my family dramatically, but it impacted, I hope, on the way I you know, worked as a Director of Public Health and making sure that we learned the lessons.
It's in the public record that you were told contemporaneously to stop criticising the emergency services response. That happened all those years ago. Ian, can I ask you first about the lying and the cover-up? Was Parliament part of the problem? Because I heard Andy Burnham say you can't ignore it. Parliament didn't help get this out into the open?
Absolutely, absolutely. Governments of all colours, you know, never covered themselves in glory, and you know, some of those prominent politicians at the time who basically ignored the cry of the Hillsborough families and survivors in Liverpool.
With Liverpool
for
fans
justice.
basically branded murderers. That's what
No, absolutely. You know, I think, you know, from Thatcher to Blair, you know, prominent politicians bought into that narrative and dismissed our claims and didn't listen to the families, and that's what Andy was alluding to.
I wonder, John, if what use anger has been, because to get to this point has taken calm heads behaving in a strategic way, and I just feel that there must have been so much anger. I wonder, given that you're a health professional, if you can say humans are capable of doing some amazing acts in the name of their friends that they've lost.
Absolutely, and we've seen that in spades with the families, with the survivors. But, you know, just responding to what Ian Byrne just said, I mean, you have to cast your mind back to Liverpool in the 80s and the way in which the whole city was being stigmatised. You know, the city had lost 60,000 jobs in a 12-month period. And we were facing all sorts of things. We had an epidemic of heroin, and youngsters had no jobs. It was a terrible situation that we were in, and you had the likes of Harry Enfield and all the rest of it just stigmatising. If Liverpool people were of colour, it would have been regarded as racism, the way Liverpool people were talked about at that time. And the government of the day really picked that up and ran with it. And I think one of the things that has always made me so proud of being from Liverpool has been the dignity with which people behaved. For me, as a medic, I understood immediately that it needed somebody like myself who had the credibility of being a professional and who was there, who got involved in sorting out the casualties and knew what the truth was, that it was necessary for somebody like me to speak up on behalf of all those who were being written off and discarded and told that they'd been drunk and it was all their own fault. You know, it was a terrible situation.
And I wonder if you can tell us how this bill will work in practice. Do you think it's going to be tested quickly?
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure down the line it will, Paddy. I think introducing that duty of candour and what Andy talked about rewiring the culture of what we find within the establishments is just so important. And you know, as I've said in the speech, you know, it felt as though every other month in Parliament somebody was standing at the dispatch box, either the Prime Minister or the Minister, and talking about state cover-ups, talking about people getting harmed at the hands of the state. And this is what the Hillsborough law will hopefully transform. It'll stop that culture. So if mistakes are made, instead of instantly looking to cover it up, people might start to hold their hands up and acknowledge that mistakes have been made, and that didn't happen with Hillsborough.
John, it does look like the British state...
It's an indictment. It's an indictment of the culture of this country.
Absolutely.
That we need a law to make senior people tell the truth.
It does look like the British state has to be dragged to this position in scandal after scandal after scandal. We'll take your lead, Professor John, with our studio guests. But just from our team here in London, thank you very much for joining us on such a momentous day, Professor.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
What does this mean for other campaigners? For a long time, Newsnight's been following the story of nuclear test veterans and their fight for answers. And this is something I was just getting to there with Ian, because speaking to Newsnight a year ago, Andy Burnham linked their case to those of the Hillsborough families, calling it a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale.
This is, like infected blood, a criminal cover-up on an industrial scale, and only Parliament can overturn it.
Right. And you believe that it's down to this Parliament. It has to happen in this Parliament, or else all those politicians in the House of Commons in this Parliament are complicit in the cover-up.
Well, John and Brian said it. I mean, you know, time is not on their side, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying that, but it isn't. Action has to be swift. And the question is, you know, we've overturned injustices recently, you know, Hillsborough, infected blood, post office. Why has this one got the firmest of lids on it? And I think it's because it goes to the heart of the British state. You know, they could blame a police force for Hillsborough, the NHS for blood. They could blame, you know, the post office for, you know, the post office scandal. Here, what has happened is that at the heart of Whitehall, British policy was basically a preordained policy, systematic, brutal policy to put tens of thousands of British servicemen in the line of radiation without their knowledge, without their consent, without personal protective equipment. And then they conducted secret tests on them and then denied it for decades. And the thing that Steve Pearce said, you know, that had then terrible, devastating consequences for their descendants, for children, for grandchildren. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that we're still here. And it reminds me of infected blood. It took me 16 years in Parliament to get to my final speech when I realised. But I plead with current members of Parliament, don't get caught up in the officialdom with all of this, and don't just send your letters and send your replies to your constituents. Look into it. Do something about it. The evidence is there if you search for it. Back the full Hillsborough law that should be coming before Parliament soon, because we need a duty of candour so that the good people in the MOD and elsewhere in the government can actually break out of this situation and say, you know what, there is an unacceptable cover-up going on. So I just, you know, say to all of my colleagues in government, do the right thing. Listen to what our colleagues have just said. This is Armed Forces Week. My goodness, you know, wouldn't you be embarrassed to say how much we respect veterans and what we will do for veterans if you don't do something about this situation?
And this is a message to your government.
It is, but I'd say it to any government, as I did on Hillsborough and I did on infected blood. You know, these things go beyond party politics. It's just not right that people have to kind of plead for the truth about what happened to them, to plead for a pension and then be denied it. I mean, this is injustice that's just off the scale. And, you know, as I say, it's different in many ways to Hillsborough, infected blood, Grenfell, post. As awful as all of those things were, this was the deliberate policy of the British state, preordained. The British state put veterans in harm's way, or servicemen at the time. You know, it decided to do that. It decided to conduct tests on them. You know, there's nothing unfortunate about this. This was the policy of the time. And I think the reason they can't admit to it is because it's so shocking that happened. And I'm afraid the truth will have to come out.
Now, nuclear veterans were promised a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer. Instead, members of the so-called Lab Rats campaign met yesterday with the Veterans Minister, Calvin Bailey, and were shown an MOD report on the medical records of veterans. Newsnight understands the report, which is expected to be published this week, will show that many medical records haven't been located and are in fact missing. Today, speaking in the Commons, Andy Burnham raised their cause and called for Parliament to hear their call for a special tribunal. Nick, it's more news coming out of the Commons, which is momentous for campaigners.
Yes, I mean, look, for Andy Burnham, there's an overarching theme here, which in Ian's word is a rewiring of the state. He talked about ending the cover-up culture, and he cited the example of where the state's failed people, Grenfell, Chinook, and then the nuclear veterans. And as you say, Andy Burnham, in his words, said the House needs to hear the call from the nuclear test veterans for a special tribunal, which he says is entirely consistent with the aims of the bill that's being passed tonight. Now, what the veterans have called for is a special tribunal that would investigate, compensate and commemorate alleged victims of the nuclear test. And Andy Burnham is now throwing his weight behind that. And as you were saying, we should at some point this week be seeing this report into the medical records of those veterans.
Thank you for that. Nuclear veteran John Morris gave me his reaction.
I spoke to Andy Burnham a matter of months ago, and he promised me that he, if given the power, would ask for a special tribunal. Yes. Today, that wish has arrived.
Yes.
I cannot thank the man enough.
Can you tell our viewers what it's been like? In your case, you took 50 years to get your son's autopsy report from the state. you can't get access to medical records. How important is it that someone has heard your request for a special tribunal?
It is extremely important because it is a step in the right direction, not only for us veterans, which is very important because unfortunately there's only 1,300 of us left. So a one-year tribunal will get the bones out into the open. It will give us a chance to justify our fight of the injustice that's gone on. The 50 years it took me to get my son's autopsy report meant that my wife went to her grave not knowing the real reason for her son's death, which was his lungs had not formed. His death certificate said he'd bronchial pneumonia. That must have been the biggest cover-up ever going. I cannot express my anger at the MOD for the way they've treated me and so many, many veterans.
Well, John, it falls to me to say we thank you for giving us your account, your heartbreaking story as a dad and a husband, and for doing the work you've done, sharing it with the media. John, thank you very much for speaking to Newsnight again.
Thank you.
A Ministry of Defence spokesperson today told us, we recognise the huge contribution that nuclear test veterans have made to national security. This government is committed to working with veterans and listening to their concerns. Currently, there is no definitive evidence that children of nuclear test veterans have an increased number of genetic mutations, says the statement, or health conditions related to genetic mutations compared to other people whose parents were not nuclear test veterans. That's the statement. Let's get the views of Ian, who's staying here, the Green Party Westminster leader, Ellie Chowns. Welcome to you, Ellie. And the former Conservative Minister, Steve Baker. Steve, your grandfather was a nuclear test veteran. I never knew.
He was, yeah. He was an instrument technician. So he went in 1954 and 1956 to set up the instrumentation, yes.
Happily, no health problems because of the way that the children were already born when he went out there. But why does the British state have to be dragged to these positions in scandal after scandal after scandal?
It is the essential question, if I may say so. I mean, Ian and also Andy Burnham said this goes beyond party politics. That was clear in everything you said, and it's really good to hear that, because I think this bill is a huge victory, not only for the people of Liverpool, but for decency and for institutional reform. I think everybody in the state, ministers, officials, ought to be asking that very question you've just asked.
Ellie,
why?
The thing is that there's no ambiguity in Andy Burnham's Newsnight interview, and it's coming with a large bill attached. If he does go and compensate nuclear test veterans, it could go as high, I've seen a figure, it could go as high as £1 billion. Do you think that the new Prime Minister has just made a spending pledge today?
Well, he was absolutely unequivocal in the Commons this evening. You know, he chose to connect the case of the nuclear test veterans with the case of the Hillsborough survivors, with the case of the Hillsborough families, and many other examples of scandals, frankly, state cover-ups. And so I think that the nuclear test veterans should be feeling hopeful, because that's another commitment of an incoming Prime Minister. He won't be able to wriggle out of that.
Yeah, and I wonder, Ian, do you think that this is the read across from the Hillsborough law? We can apply it to other examples of state failure quite soon?
Absolutely. I think what the test veterans are asking for is what the Hillsborough families and survivors were asking for. We've got the independent panel. They're asking for something really similar to uncover what we've seen from that statement, because that statement from the Ministry of Defence is absolutely shocking.
Will you hold Andy Burnham to account? He's your friend in this. Are you going to hold his feet to the flame?
Well, absolutely. Andy's made them commitments. I thought he spoke really brilliantly last year on this. He spoke well in Parliament today. He's made a commitment to nuclear test veterans, so hopefully that'll be followed through. It's got to be.
It has to be said, I think, that denial and delay and defensiveness have been the hallmarks of the state's reaction to all of these scandals. And that is what, that's one of the, if there's a problem in this bill, it's that it's reactive. What do we do to get the state ahead of these problems? And instead of treating the voices of victims as a nuisance, to hear them and to start acting early.
Yes, I mean, as was said earlier, it shouldn't take a law to force people who are in power, who theoretically have positions of public service, to tell the truth. Sadly, it has. But, you know, I was really moved in the chamber today to hear the tributes to the families who have fought for so long, not just for justice for themselves, but to change the way that the state works, so that these scandals don't happen again.
Because it does give you cause to be very proud of British people that they calmly go about fixing the thing that the state's done wrong to them. When I spoke to John, when speaking to Professor John as well, it's a calm dignity of people to keep going when many of us would give up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brilliant trait, what we've got, and I've seen that through Hillsborough. But since coming into Parliament, seen so many campaigners, Steve Pearce, John, you know, so dignified in what they're asking. They're not asking for the world, are they? They're just asking for truth and accountability. Well, and unfortunately, sorry, Steve, that statement shows why the culture needs to change, because that is a statement of the culture of what we're trying to change.
Ian's hitting the nail on the head here. Culture. There's not much in this world I really hate, but snobbishness I really hate. When people with status look down their nose with contempt at people without status.
Posties.
Yes. Particularly
football fans.
When they're victims. I mean, you guys were so dignified. I looked up today the lies which were told about people. Lurid, despicable lies to try and defend themselves from people with status against innocent victims. And I think you guys did really well not to pour out a lot of bile and contempt for the people who did that. I thought you showed real dignity. Tricky for me not to.